Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews. For millions, their names are forever linked to one of Hollywood's most beloved films, The Sound of Music. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. The stern Captain Von Trapp slowly softened by Maria's warmth and charm, a love story that continues to move audiences nearly 60 years later. But away from the spotlight, the story was more complicated. Plummer, often candid to the point of being brutal, admitted in later interviews that his feelings toward Andrews were anything but affectionate during filming. What could possibly make one of the great actors of his generation bristle at the woman adored worldwide for her talent, grace, and kindness? To understand, we must go back to the beginning, back to the set of The Sound of Music and the uneasy relationship that unfolded behind its carefully constructed magic. The weight of a classic in the making. The Sound of Music began filming in March 1964, with Julie Andrews fresh from her Academy Award-winning performance in Mary Poppins. At only 29, she was at the height of her career, praised for her pristine soprano voice, disciplined work ethic, and image of wholesome perfection. Christopher Plummer, 5 years her senior, was already known in theater circles and had several notable film credits, including The Fall of the Roman Empire. But compared to Andrews, he was still relatively unknown to global audiences. The pairing would prove iconic, but for Plummer, it would also be the source of lifelong ambivalence. From the start, Plummer found himself disillusioned with the film. In private, he mocked it as The Sound of Mucus, a jab at what he considered its overly saccharine tone. To him, the screenplay was sentimental and lacked the dramatic edge he craved as an actor. He later confessed that trying to make the role of Captain Von Trapp interesting felt like flogging a dead horse. The contrast was stark. While Andrews embraced the project and poured her energy into every rehearsal and take, Plummer regarded it as a job to endure rather than a role to cherish. The imbalance was magnified by their personalities. Andrews was famously cheerful, endlessly polite, and determined to maintain harmony on set. Plummer, by his own admission, was more cynical, restless, and prone to irritability. He described her constant kindness as overwhelming, once saying it felt like being hit over the head with a Valentine's Day card every day. What the world saw as angelic, he found suffocating. This difference in temperament created an invisible barrier between them, one that Plummer did not attempt to hide when speaking about his experience in later years. Yet despite his frustrations, Plummer's presence was essential. Even Andrews later acknowledged that his stern authority gave the film its grounding, preventing it from becoming unbearably sweet. In her own words, "It was really thanks to Chris Plummer who gave the film its glue." Still, in those early days of production, Plummer's dislike for the material and his irritation with Andrews colored the atmosphere, laying the foundation for the comments he would make decades later about why he simply could not stand her during filming. Julie Andrews, the golden star, he couldn't ignore. By the time The Sound of Music entered production, Julie Andrews was no longer just a promising young actress. She was the embodiment of Hollywood's new golden era. In 1964, her portrayal of Mary Poppins had earned her an Academy Award for Best Actress and a Golden Globe, cementing her reputation as the voice and face of perfect innocence. Critics hailed her as practically perfect in every way, and her image aligned seamlessly with the character of Maria Von Trapp, the spirited governess who would bring joy and music to a grieving family. For the studio, casting Andrews was a stroke of genius. For Christopher Plummer, however, it presented a unique problem. Plummer had spent much of his career on the stage, honing his craft in Shakespearean roles that demanded complexity, nuance, and emotional weight. Compared to those experiences, the captain felt flat, a stiff and uninspiring figure defined more by posture and stern expressions than by any real depth. While Andrews thrived in the role of Maria, bringing her signature brightness to every scene, Plummer felt trapped in a part he could not respect. Worse still, Andrews's boundless optimism clashed directly with his own temperament. He once confessed that her relentless niceness irritated him to no end, explaining that her presence was so sugary sweet it became suffocating. To him, she represented everything about the film he despised: sentimental, wholesome, and painfully innocent. This tension was not entirely personal. Plummer admitted in later interviews that his irritation with Andrews was less about her as a person and more about what she symbolized. She embodied the Disney-fied version of storytelling that he had little patience for. He even nicknamed her Miss Disney, a subtle jab at both her Mary Poppins success and her tendency to keep the child actors entertained with cheerful Disney songs between takes. In his view, this only reinforced the cloying atmosphere of the production. Yet, Andrews's presence was vital. She carried the weight of the film, her voice soaring through Rodgers and Hammerstein's score, her warmth radiating in every scene. To audiences, she was the heart of The Sound of Music. To Plummer, she was both a saving grace and a constant reminder of the project's flaws. Coping with the film he couldn't stand. For Christopher Plummer, surviving the months of filming The Sound of Music meant finding ways to escape the sweetness he despised. By his own admission, alcohol became one of those escapes. He later confessed that he often drank heavily during production, especially in Salzburg, where the long days and the relentlessly cheerful tone of the film left him restless. One of the most striking revelations came years later when he admitted he was drunk during the music festival scene, the climactic moment when Captain Von Trapp defies the Nazis by singing with his children. To audiences, the scene was stirring and powerful. To Plummer, it was a blur, clouded by the alcohol he used to dull his frustration. Off-camera, Plummer sought solace in Austrian bars, sometimes taking Charmian Carr, the 21-year-old actress who played Liesel, along with him. Their outings sparked rumors of a behind-the-scenes romance, particularly because of the 33-year age gap and the fact that Plummer was already married. Carr herself admitted years later on The Oprah Winfrey Show that she had a massive crush on him, calling him perfect and praising his flawless accent. But she denied that anything romantic happened between them, explaining that her admiration was one-sided. Even so, the gossip fueled the perception of Plummer as a restless leading man who found little joy in the production itself, but plenty in the distractions surrounding it. His reliance on alcohol created other problems, too. Costume designers grew frustrated when his uniforms no longer fit properly due to weight fluctuations from his drinking habits. He joked about it later, but at the time it caused real headaches for the wardrobe department, who had to make repeated adjustments. Behind the charm and professionalism that appeared on screen, there was a man struggling to reconcile his own artistic standards with what he considered a shallow, sentimental job. This coping mechanism was not unusual for Plummer. In his memoir, In Spite of Myself, published in 2008, he admitted that throughout much of his career, he leaned on alcohol to get through roles that bored him or personal moments that weighed heavily. In Salzburg, surrounded by singing children, sweeping alpine landscapes, and Julie Andrews's unrelenting cheerfulness, the temptation to drink was especially strong. The contrast between the joyful fantasy being created on screen and the reality of Plummer's dissatisfaction could not have been sharper. It was in that space that his dislike for Andrews became even more pronounced, not necessarily because of anything she did, but because she reminded him of the kind of polished, sugar-coated storytelling he longed to escape. Truth and Fiction, a story rewritten. Part of Christopher Plummer's frustration with The Sound of Music stemmed from his awareness that the story being told bore only a passing resemblance to reality. To him, the script lacked grit, sanding away the rough edges of the Von Trapp family's true history in favor of an idealized fairy tale. This dissonance bothered him deeply, particularly as an actor trained in classical theater, where truth and complexity mattered more than sentiment. The real story, as he knew, was far messier. Take the relationship at the heart of the film. In the movie, Maria and Captain Von Trapp fall into a sweeping romance that culminates in one of cinema's most beloved love stories. In reality, Maria Von Trapp admitted in her 1949 memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers, that she did not marry Georg out of passion. She married him because she loved the children and felt it was God's will when the nuns persuaded her. Love grew later, gradually, but it was never the instant spark portrayed on screen. To Plummer, playing a man frozen into a rigid stereotype while Julie Andrews represented pure light and joy felt false, an insult to the complex truth of real people. Even the portrayal of Georg von Trapp was a distortion. The film painted him as a cold, militaristic father who whistled for his children and kept them in rigid formation until Maria thawed his heart. In reality, Georg was remembered by his children as gentle, affectionate, and deeply engaged in family life. Maria herself was the one who managed the household finances and enforced discipline, not Georg. For Plummer, being forced into the role of a caricature rather than a nuanced man only heightened his disdain. He joked that no matter how hard he tried to add humor or subtlety, it was like flogging a dead horse. Other liberties grated as well. The eldest child, depicted in the film as Liesel with her romantic subplot involving the telegram boy turned Nazi, never existed. The real eldest Von Trapp was Rupert, a doctor living in Vermont by the time the movie premiered. He even joked to patients, "I'm the real Liesel," poking fun at Hollywood's invention. And the famous Alpine escape, one of the film's most iconic sequences, was pure fiction. The family did not trek across the mountains with their suitcases in hand. They boarded a train to Italy, leveraging Georg's citizenship from his birthplace in Zadar. A film beloved, an actor resentful. When The Sound of Music premiered in March 1965, it was an immediate sensation. Within weeks, it climbed to #1 at the box office, and by November 1966, it had surpassed Gone with the Wind to become the highest-grossing film of all time, a title it held for 5 years. Audiences across the globe were captivated by its music, sweeping landscapes, and tender romance. It won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, and brought Julie Andrews another Golden Globe, further cementing her reputation as the queen of wholesome musical cinema. For most of the cast, the film's success was a triumph. For Christopher Plummer, however, it was a burden. Plummer never hid his distaste. He repeatedly referred to the project as awful, sentimental, and gooey, and lamented that he could never escape being remembered as Captain Von Trapp. While the world adored the film, he privately seethed at the way it overshadowed his more serious stage and film work. He had dreamed of building a career on Shakespeare, Chekhov, and challenging dramas, but instead he was tethered to a role he found shallow. Even decades later, when he won his first Academy Award in 2011 for Beginners, journalists still asked him about The Sound of Music. The irony was inescapable. The performance he least respected was the one that defined him. Julie Andrews, by contrast, embraced the film's legacy. For her, Maria was a role that aligned with her persona, and she spoke fondly of the production throughout her life. In interviews, she praised Plummer as the glue that kept the story from collapsing under its own sweetness. But in the years immediately following the release, their personal dynamic remained complicated. Andrews's warmth and popularity only highlighted Plummer's frustrations. He once admitted that while everyone adored her, he could barely tolerate her relentless optimism during filming. And yet, time softened his bitterness. As years passed, Plummer began to speak more warmly of Andrews. He conceded that his earlier criticisms were immature and that she was not only a gifted actress, but also an extraordinary colleague. Their relationship, once tinged with irritation, evolved into a genuine friendship that lasted until Plummer's death in 2021. Andrews, now in her 80s, often reflects on that bond, describing him as a cherished friend who gave The Sound of Music its grounding strength. Reflection, regret, and a lasting bond. In his later years, Christopher Plummer never fully changed his opinion of The Sound of Music. Even in interviews as late as 2011, he still called it too sentimental, too polished, too safe. He admitted that playing Captain Von Trapp had been frustrating, that no matter how hard he tried to inject humor or subtlety, he felt boxed in by a script that was sticky with sugar. And yet, as he grew older, his words took on a softer edge. He no longer dismissed the film entirely, instead acknowledging that while it had been artistically unfulfilling for him, it had become something far bigger than himself. It was, as he conceded, a cultural landmark, one that outlived his own criticisms. What also changed was his view of Julie Andrews. Where once he could not stand her unfailing niceness, later he praised her as a true professional and a dear friend. In candid conversations, he confessed that his early irritation was a reflection of his own immaturity. Andrews, meanwhile, never spoke ill of him. Instead, she consistently described him as the actor who gave the film its glue, the one who kept the story from collapsing into a fairy tale too sweet to bear. Their friendship endured across decades. They appeared together at reunions, shared interviews, and remained close until Plummer's death on February 5, 2021, at the age of 91. When the news broke, Andrews released a statement that revealed the depth of their bond. "The world has lost a consummate actor today, and I have lost a cherished friend. I treasure the memories of our work together and all the humor and fun we shared through the years." For audiences, those words were a poignant reminder that the tension of 1964 had long since melted into respect and love. What began as professional friction, as one man's frustration with a co-star he thought too perfect, ended as one of the most enduring friendships in Hollywood. Christopher Plummer may have loathed The Sound of Music, but his performance remains unforgettable, and his uneasy relationship with Julie Andrews turned into a friendship that lasted a lifetime. What about you? When you think of The Sound of Music, do you remember it as the magical story it seems? Or do you see it differently now, knowing what was happening behind the scenes? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the hidden side of Hollywood.